time to go back and record some more Dragon Quest 2. God help me. We're finally here, aren't we? Finally going to talk about Dragon Quest 2, going to critique this game. Yep, finally here to talk about this. This game. I'm just gonna say that right now, this game sucks dicks. But I think I'm way far ahead of myself. We're just starting this video right here and I'm already saying this game. I think it's time to just talk about some things about this game before we dive right in. So there are two things we know about the development of Dragon Quest 2. Number one, the game was being developed a month before the first game released. And number two, the game was supposed to release during the holiday season. So why were they so confident that they needed to work on a sequel? And number two, why sequel so quickly? So the first reason is purely my own speculation. I don't know too much about the background, but it's been commonly known once a game goes gold, normally you take a month to go on and produce cartridges. So my own speculation would be that Enix probably didn't have any other projects for Chunsoft to work on, and fearing they could lose Chunsoft to another publisher, they had them work on a sequel for the time being. And if the first game didn't do that well, they could just have them rework the project into something else. But of course, the first game did pretty well. It was a world-mount success like I said in the first video. Which kind of gets us into our second reason, why sequel so quickly? Well, because of that word-of-mouth success, Enix became much more pushy for a sequel. They wanted the next game to come out during the holiday season because they could see that game doing massive numbers during that time. The producer on Dragon Quest 2 would constantly push Koichi Nakamura on a date, and Nakamura would normally respond was the November release date of that year. But of course that didn't happen, the game got delayed. From a November release date to a December release date, just because they needed to get things finished up. A lot of ideas were on the chopping room floor, and they needed to get time to finish up everything they already had done. So by the time playtesting came around, which this game barely received any playtesting, it was found out that the game was way too hard, so they had to delay the game another time just to make sure that the game was a little bit more easier. And even then, it was just a band-aid on the overall issue, when the issue really needed stitches. So when Dragon Quest 2 finally released in January of 1987, the game was a bigger success than the first game. Lifetime sales estimated to be around 1 million more than the first game. And for the most part, that was mostly due to Shueisha pushing the game again, this time with their V-Jump magazines. It's the first volume detailing things on Dragon Quest 2. I mean, if you have Arale dressed up as the Prince of Minahal, that's probably going to push numbers. And the late Koichi Sugiyama signed on a popular Japanese pop singer to do a vocal of one of the songs that was in Dragon Quest 2. But the same could be said the same about the localized version of Dragon Quest 2. As of course, 3 years later, Dragon Quest 2 was localized under the title Dragon Warrior 2, which one little pet peeve I have is that the title screen calls it Dragon Warrior Part 2, even though nothing from the promotional material calls it Dragon Warrior Part 2. Little pet peeve of mine. Dragon Warrior 2 was published by Enix of America instead of Nintendo of America. And Enix of America being a much smaller company than Nintendo of America, having less money to work with, they don't have that money to spend on a major magazine campaign to give out free games, nor do they have the money to go out and produce that many units, and if they produce millions upon millions of units and the game bombs, that's going to decimate the company, isn't it? So yeah, Enix played it much more conservatively in comparison to Nintendo of America when it came down to producing units, and it definitely shows as Dragon Warrior 2 only sold 150,000 units. Yeah, it's definitely a far cry in comparison to the success Dragon Quest 2 had in Japan. But even then, over the years, Dragon Quest 2 has been seen as the black sheep of the franchise. Mostly due to that difficulty. And we're definitely going to be talking about that difficulty. Oh yes, we will. And we're looking at multiple different versions, which I kind of regret doing that because it was so much of a slog. As we're looking at the NES version, the Super Famicom remake, the Game Boy Color remake, and the mobile version, but this time under the Switch version. Sounds kind of confusing, but trust me, you'll understand when we look at Dragon Quest 2 on mobile. But anyways, it's finally time to talk about Dragon Quest 2, and we start off with that plot. As we know already in Dragon Quest 1, the Scion of Erdrick defeated the evil Dragon Lord. And of course, instead of ruling the kingdom of Tanacle Castle, he would move on to find new lands with the Princess Gwendolyn. To which of course they would find new lands alongside making new children. In each land they found, they will have their children rule in their stead. And of course, 100 years of peace would reign, these lands would become kingdoms, but of course evil would rear its ugly head. And that would be the evil priest Hargon, to which he doesn't want to rule the world like the Dragon Lord. He wants the world destroyed, because he doesn't see any use of the world, so he just wants a gun. So the first plan of attack is attacking the kingdom of Moonbrook, to which he manages to bring that castle to ruins. But one lone soldier manages to survive the onslaught and manages to make to the kingdom of Mendenhall to warn the king that Hargon is planning his all-out attack. To which the king entrusts his son, the Prince of Mendenhall, to go out and face off Hargon. our hero will need to go out and find the Prince of Cannock and the Princess of Moonbrook to go on and give Hargon the what for. But of course, as we know already, the Kingdom of Moonbrook was burned down to shreds, so it's going to be a little bit hard to find the Princess of Moonbrook at the very least. So the first order of business for the Prince of Mendenhall is to go and find his cousin, the Prince of Cannock, which turns out to be a wild goose chase just to find this man. First, in the castle of Cannock, you find out he already left on a journey to find you. Then you go to this cave that his last was, already gone. You go back to the castle of Mendenhall, and he's gone there as well, until finally you go into a town and find out he's there. And finally he joins up with you. So upon reaching the ruined castle of Moonbrook and finding the soul of the King of Moonbrook, you find out that the Princess of Moonbrook is indeed alive. But she has been cursed to become a dog. And the only way to break the curse is using the Mirror of Ra to undo the curse. After finding the mirror and using it on the Princess of Moonbrook to uncurse her, she is back to being a princess and joins us on our journey to defeat Hargon. Our hero's journey manages to reach them to Tanago Castle alongside the ruined area of Charlotte's Castle, to where they meet the descendant of the Dragon Lord, to which he tells us that the only way to reach Hargon is obtaining 5 sigils to reawaken the goddess Rubis, and also obtaining the false idol to even gain access to the main area that Hargon resides, which is Randirek. So once again, like Dragon Quest I, is a journey around the world to find 5 little MacGuffins to reawaken the goddess and gain access to the big area where Hargon resides. And also on top of that, finding pieces of Erdrick's armor. So after all that's said and done, our heroes reawaken the goddess Rubis, and she gives us her charm, and we manage to reach Randirek, where the main area where Hargon resides in this area is the Hull of Hargon. Which, upon entering, our heroes is introduced with an illusion that Hargon puts on them, but because of the goddess Rubis and her charm, they're able to circumvent this illusion. But of course, they have to deal with Hargon's top brass, which happens to be Atlas, Panzuzu, and Belial. And finally, they manage to reach Hargon and give him the what for. Upon giving him that what for, Hargon calls upon the master he's been praying to for all this time, which is Malroth, the Master of Destruction. And of course, he arrives upon our heroes to take them down, but that doesn't happen. Our heroes take him down. So peace is once again restored, and the Prince of Mendenhall is now appointed as the new King of Mendenhall, with the Prince of Cannock and the Princess of Moonbrook on his side, and everyone lived happily ever after. And that was Dragon Quest II's plot right there. When you look deeper into Dragon Quest II's plot, you can tell there's a lot more going on with the story here in comparison to Dragon Quest I. Dragon Quest I had the simple premise of the chosen hero going on and defeating the evil one. While Dragon Quest II, it's sort of similar to Dragon Quest I, but this time there's more things involved. The evil priest going out and trying to destroy the world, going out with this first all-out attack, and then working with the descendant of the Dragon Lord to go out and find these 5 sigils. And on top of that, it's 3 heroes going on this journey together as the chosen ones to defeat the evil. In some cases, you would say there's just more flavor text going on in here, but I'd say ultimately, I think the themes are relatively nice here, where you have 3 people who are related in a way, going on under duty to go on and defeat the evil one, as that's their job right there. I think it's an interesting theme of family working together. Well, I guess it's time to talk about the gameplay. Yeah, I think it's time to talk about the gameplay. Well, let's start with the positives first, because, of course, when it comes down to a game like this, a game that I personally do not like, there's some positives I do like about this game, because as a sequel, it does improve on certain things. When talking about the gameplay of Dragon Quest II, it's quite similar to Dragon Quest I in some ways. But of course, quality of life improvements were made to this game alongside some expansions to previous gameplay elements and some new additions. Let's start with quality of life first. The menu system was given some little bit of rework. For one, the take and search command were now combined to one command under the name search, which makes it a lot more easier if you're looking around for some stuff. You can simply press search and you already get the item on your hand. There's now an equip menu because there's multiple armor sets to choose from, and on top of that we all have 3 party members, so it makes it easier to equip armor sets to your party members. And we can now automatically go downstairs! What a beautiful thing right there! It took this long, but finally we have a way to go downstairs automatically. And the door command can only be used when you use the particular key. What I mean by this is that technically the only way you can open doors is going to the items, finding the key that you want to use, and there you go, you open the door. And speaking about keys, no more magic keys. Magic keys are completely gone from this game, as there's only 3 keys to choose from. The silver key, gold key, and thief key, which is the only key that you have to buy. And it makes things a lot more easier when you go through doors, just selecting the particular key to choose from, and there you go, you open the door. Much better than going out and constantly buying keys, especially with an expanded game like this. And speaking about things that are nice and amazing, caves are now nice and lit now! No more torches, no more glow spell, none of that. Because all that dark cave stuff nonsense completely removed from this game here. Now onto the expansions from previous mechanics. Battles are no longer a one-on-one affair like in the last game. Most of the time you're facing multiple monsters at a time. When you go on select fight now, you have an option of which enemy you want to go on and hit. It does make the beginning of the game a bit challenging when you only have one character that only knows physical attacks, no magic spells. But that makes it perfect timing to talk about the brand new party members you have, as we now have 3 party members: Prince of Mendenhall, Prince of Cannock, and the Princess of Moonbrook. Let's start with the Prince of Mendenhall. He doesn't know any magic spells, but he excels greatly in physical ability. He can literally take down enemies in one hit. While the Prince of Cannock, he's not as strong as the Prince of Mendenhall, but he does make up with some decent magic spells. And then finally, the Princess of Moonbrook is jack shit when it comes down to physical, but excels greatly in magical abilities. Essentially, when you combine all 3 of them together, they kind of equal up to the original hero from the first game, but on top of that, they also expand greatly due to the expanded set of magic spells, as we now have debuffing spells, reviving spells, alongside the spells that were there earlier like Fireball, that used to be called Hurt, Return, and the such. Though keep in mind there are enemies that can poison you, so that is something to consider. But in terms of the expansions that were made to gameplay mechanics particularly was the battle system and the amount of party members you now have, I think these are great additions to the game as a whole. Finally, let's talk about the brand new additions that were added to this game, which there are 2, Sailing and the House of Healing. Let's start with Sailing first. You get this towards the middle of the game once you save this one girl from a bunch of demons, and the father of the girl gives you his boat, which allows you to sail around the world, because Dragon Quest II is a much more expansive map. You can't just walk around the whole area on foot. You actually do need a ship to sail around the world. So personally, I think this is a nice addition right here to try to expand the world a little bit more, to let you know, yeah, you can't just walk around the whole area. You actually need some help to travel around the world. Another addition is the House of Healing. Here in the House of Healing, if you don't have antidote herbs to help you heal poison or what have you, you can go here to remove curses, remove poison, and heck, even revive your team members, because your team members can die in battle. And when they die, meaning that they won't be useful in battle when they're dead, and you need to go back and heal them. Though eventually you do learn revival spells to help bring your party members back to life. So one thing when we talk about the House of Healing relates to another topic, and that of course is the localization. Much like Dragon Warrior 2 uses an Old English dialect for all the characters to speak, the localized version also includes an intro sequence that was not present in the original Famicom release. Basically just goes into the background story of what has happened after Dragon Quest I, and actually shows the full scale attack from Argon on the Castle of Moonbrook. But it was not just that. Further things were changed in the English localization to essentially abide to the guidelines that Nintendo of America had set forth in regards to what was allowed and what wasn't allowed in their games. In the case here, the House of Healing is actually originally a church in the original Japanese release, crosses and all. And of course, in the localized version, that was changed to be, of course, the House of Healing, and the crosses were replaced with the stars. And the priest was changed to look completely different from a priest. And on top of that, when your characters die, normally they will end up in these coffins. That was of course changed in the English localization to be little ghost guys. But yeah, if you're a stickler for keeping the original intention of the game, then Dragon Warrior 2, the original English localization, might not be the version for you to go on and play. Graphically speaking, Dragon Quest II looks relatively similar to Dragon Quest I if you're talking about the localized versions of these games. Because yeah, in the Famicom version, they do look different in many cases with the multiple facing sprites and the such. But there is indeed one little problem in regards to Dragon Warrior 2 in terms of the graphics, at least if you plan to play with original hardware. That will be sprite flickering. Yeah, much like many other NES games, Dragon Warrior 2 has a problem when there's way too many sprites on the screen, all those sprites start flickering and the such. I didn't have a problem with that because I was playing on the Retro ABS, which allows you to remove sprite flickering, but do keep that in mind when you plan to play Dragon Quest II on original hardware. The music though, what an improvement. The late Koichi Sugiyama was able to step his game up in terms of making music for the Famicom. And I'm not just talking about orchestrated music, which is always amazing. The chiptune music is also a great listen to. This is music I can actually listen to, in comparison to the ear-grating shit that was in the original version of Dragon Quest I. So okay, we have a lot of things talked about in regards to Dragon Quest II that I actually liked. We talked about gameplay improvements, we talked about the graphics, we talked about the music, we talked a little bit about the localization, which I'm kind of neutral on. I guess it's time to talk about the negatives. I guess this is where the positives end, and we talk about the things I hate about this game. So all the negative stems around the progression. Let's start with the least most offensive thing about the progression. Going from point A to point B is relatively similar to the first game. Like before, you need to talk to town folks and the such to get a general understanding to where to go next. Not entirely true, because the sigils come into play. At first, it's pretty similar to before. The Descendant of the Dragon Lord actually tells you where you find the first sigil, which is relatively nice right there. But after that, you're on your own right there. Sure, there's one area where the king gives you the sigil, but the other sigils, you literally need to go on an Easter hunt to go out and find these damn sigils. And barely any of the townsfolk will give you any hints of where to find the next sigil, as the only way you can get any kind of hint is the Echo Flute, to where you have to find this second treasure in the middle of the fucking ocean, where the ocean looks the same, and then afterwards you give it to this guy and he gives you the Echo Flute. And the Echo Flute is only really useful if you're in the exact same room as where that sigil is. So you can literally be in an area where the sigil is, but you wouldn't know because you're not in that same room. This is the most cryptic thing in Dragon Quest II, and I don't know why it's this cryptic when Dragon Quest I did it so well, where they gave you relatively good hints of where to go next, or where to find the next piece of Erdrick's armor. Here, they tell you jack shit about these damn sigils. And quite honestly, I literally just used a guide. And speaking of guides, in regards to the sigils, a guide is almost required, because it's so damn cryptic of where these damn things are. And also, a map's also required, because there's literally an area in the game that you need to go to get the gold key, and the island where the gold key is the size of a f***ing testicle. Why is it so damn small, and why is it in the middle of the f***ing ocean? And we're not even done yet. And none of this stacks up to the biggest thing about the progression, which is the grind. Yep, the grind is back from the first game, and somehow it's worse. Let me step back a bit. At first, it's not too bad. The grind seems to be just as much as the first game. Your party members will level up at a steady pace, but then it hits you. Bullshit enemies that go on target one person at a time and hit like 10-ton bricks and straight up fuck you and your party members. And it should be a commonality to see a person dead after you're done exploring a dungeon or just doing some general grinding. It's so bad that I've made dozens of trips in and out of the dungeon just because a party member died due to a bunch of enemies targeting that guy. And the worst of them all is of course the Prince of Canon. What a piece of glass right here. Not a glass cannon because he's a piece of shit. And yeah, there's times where the Prince of Menahal and the Princess of Moonbrook also died, but it doesn't equate as much compared to the Prince of Canon. I can barely count how many times this died on my watch. At least with the Prince of Menahal and Princess of Moonbrook, I can keep count of when they've died. But this I can't. And it just gets going back and forth, just grinding, and back and forth to the dungeon, and then they you, and then you have to go out, and then back and forth. Oh my god! It was so much that I literally went out and cheated. Yeah, I'm just gonna say that right now. I used Game Genie. And it's nothing too crazy. I just used a code that essentially allowed me to increase the amount of EXP I gain from defeating monsters. But still, it's relatively bullshit. I have to deal with enemies that constantly target one person at a time. I mean, look at this right here. The Prince of Canon was at full f***ing health, and already he's already f***ing mauled by these f***ing saber cats. Jesus Prince of Canon, can you at least stay alive for 1 f***ing second? And even with the of Prince of Canon and all the progression of the grinding, there's still Randarak. This place to hell. I mean, where to begin? There are enemies with hard-hitting spells that can hit everyone, enemies who can attack twice, enemies with hard-hitting spells that can hit everyone, enemies with instant kill moves, and enemies that have hard-hitting spells that can hit everyone. Holy what is up with the place? I mean, there's at the very least an area where you can go on, save your game, and heal up your party members when needed, but why is it so hard? The cave to Randarak wasn't that hard. Sure, the enemies were strong, but I didn't feel they were that compared to the enemies here. And then the Hall of Hargon is also fine to me. Why is it this one specific place that is so with its difficulty? To write a home of what I mean, Panzuzu, Atlas, and Belial are all cakewalks in comparison to these assholes in Randarak. Sure, they're pretty hard when you first face them, but for the most part, I had an easier time with them than the enemies in Randarak. And Hargon's a bitch compared to these guys. Yeah, he's hard, but still, I can easily deal with Hargon in comparison to the f***ers outside. And Balrog's also a bitch. Because you want to know the strategy against winning against Balrog? Buff up your defenses and debuff his defenses. He can't do against that. And sure, he has some spells that can go on debuff your defenses, buff up his defenses, but even then, if you continuously debuff his defenses and buff up yours, he can't do against that. You basically win the match. But we're not done yet, are we? Because we still have remakes to talk about. Other versions to talk about, like I said in the beginning. Why did I do it? Because I guess I hate myself. So, the Super Famicom version. Not gonna go too deep into this version here, because this is pretty much the same version from Dragon Quest 1 plus 2. And when it comes down to general improvements, it's pretty similar to Dragon Quest 1 in terms of those improvements right there. You now have a bank, enemies were rebalanced, and some extra things are added in, like a brand new intro sequence to Dragon Quest II, which has a fantastic music piece. But ultimately, my main problem with Dragon Quest II Super Famicom Remake is that the core of the game is still relatively the same. Even though they've reworked some of the balance here and there, just the overall grind is still annoying, and the fact that some enemies are still bullshit really gets to me. And hell, Randarek is still a fucking bullshit area to begin with. But overall, I can smoothly go through the Super Famicom Remake over the NES version any time of the week because of the slight tweaks they've made to the gameplay, despite me just not liking the game in general. Graphically, it looks better, music sounds better, all that's nice right there, but overall, the core of the game is still what it is. Which leaves us with the Gameboy Color version. Much like the Super Famicom Remake, the Gameboy Color version fixes up a lot of issues from Dragon Quest II, pretty much carrying over a lot of the improvements from the Super Famicom Remake. From adding in the bank, the intro sequence is still here, graphics are of course on a downgrade because it's on Game Boy, and the music is now back to chiptune, which still sounds better than the NES version. But there's one tiny little problem. One little problem that becomes a bigger problem, and that is screen crunch. If you remember in my Dragon Quest 1 review, I did mention in that version of the game there was screen crunch in that game. But ultimately I didn't find it to be much of an issue because of the fact that the world in Dragon Quest 1 was relatively small enough that screen crunch wasn't that much of an issue, and towns were redesigned to accommodate for screen crunch. Well, in Dragon Quest 2 with a much bigger map, that's much more of a bigger problem. Sure, they go out their way in towns of redesigning them to be more accommodating for the screen crunch, but they didn't really do anything to address the issue with the world map. The world map is huge, and there's little areas that are the size of nutsacks that you have to go on and find. Why in the blue they thought it was a good idea to not include an in-game map is beyond me. Like, it makes no sense to not include an in-game map for a world this big, and you know for a fact that there's going to be screen crunch. But overall, the game's core is still pretty much the same, bearing that big issue of screen crunch. Which finally leaves us with the mobile version, which we're looking at the Switch version. And now we have the mobile version of the game, which we're looking via the Switch. Like I mentioned before in the Dragon Quest 1 review, Square Enix went out their way and ported the mobile version over to consoles via the 3DS, PS4, and Nintendo Switch. And the Switch version was the only version that got localized to the West. So we're going to look at this via a checklist of what it does right when it comes down to this version right here. For one, it does go out its way and includes all the quality of life features from the Super Famicom and Game Boy Color version. So that's a check right there. This version also includes an in-game map, which is something that the remakes didn't even include, which is also a check right there, because for a map as expansive as Dragon Quest 2, you need to have an in-game map. Because key items have this glow around them when you find where they are, it makes sigil hunting much more easier. So that's another check right there, making the sigils much more easier to get, and a little bit less cryptic. Though of course, townsfolk don't tell you where they are, so you're kind of on your own when you look for these guys. Strangely enough, this version right here also goes out of its way to make the experience a little bit more easier. Quite honestly, until Randarek, I really had an easier time playing through this version of Dragon Quest 2. Now let's get into the downsides of this remake right here. One, graphically, this game just doesn't look that good. Well, with a caveat. The mobile version on iOS and Android looks fine, but the Switch version just looks god-awful with the bad shimmering because of poor interpolation and the smoothed out sprites. It just doesn't look that great. And also, some things were downgraded, like the intro sequence, going back to how it was back in the NES version of the game. So those are things to keep in mind. While this is a great version of Dragon Quest 2, there are some downgrades to it, primarily due to the amount of effort that was placed in this remake here. So yeah, those are all the versions of Dragon Quest 2. Guess it's time to sign it off with my final thoughts. Dragon Quest 2 in many ways is an innovative game. It adds and improves on things from the first game. From having a party member system, the sailing around the world, from a streamlined menu system, Dragon Quest 2 does innovate within the franchise. But unfortunately, it also introduces a lot of problems that the first game did just fine. For one, finding the sigils is relatively cryptic, which is something that the first game did better, of finding the Sunstone and Staff of Rain, and the balancing is way out of whack, which is something the first game was able to do better. So despite all the improvements, I can't say Dragon Quest 2 is a better game than the first game. I would say it's more innovative than the first game, but not better. The first game was able to work around its limitations to make a relatively well-balanced game, while the second game adds a bunch of stuff in there while not taking account into the balancing of the game. Dragon Quest II is a game that I probably wouldn't play for a good while. It took a lot of dedication of me to play 4 different versions of Dragon Quest II consecutively. I had to take a couple months off during the review process. But if you're interested in Dragon Quest II, or you're planning to play through all the mainline Dragon Quest games and you eventually stumble on your way to Dragon Quest II, here's my recommendation. Play the mobile or Switch version. Those are the best versions of Dragon Quest II, primarily because of the map and better balancing of the game. But do keep in mind that the core of the game is still relatively unbalanced and at times can be relatively cryptic. And if you like Dragon Quest II, great. I'm not here to change your opinions. I'm just here to state my own opinions. So yeah, Dragon Quest III will be the next review coming up, but that'll take a while because I'm doing the same thing before where I'm doing 4 different versions of that game, so it's gonna take some time. In the meantime, we'll continue pumping out videos in the foreseeable future. So comment down below, let me know what you guys think about Dragon Quest II, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.